Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert. Welcome back to the TED Show. I'm really honored and excited to have a very dear friend on the show. Cindy Whitaker is here. She is with BASE Camp, Children's Cancer Foundation. So we're going to talk about BASE Camp, but we're also going to talk about her personal journey with her son, Danny. Danny is a childhood cancer survivor and recently has had a whole bunch of stuff that Cindy will share come back. So, Cindy, thank you for doing the show. We have a big GoFundMe out. It should be already in the promo there that you guys are seeing as you're seeing the show, and it'll also be in the comments. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on here.
I'm very honored and excited. You know how much I love you, and of course, you know how much I love Base Camp. And of course, then we all love Danny, and Danny has had an amazing story. Tell us a little bit about you and Danny's journey, because what I
So,
want them to see is what happened, and then there was a long,
right.
giant span in between. So I'm going to let you take it away.
So in 2004, actually April 12th, 2004, Danny was diagnosed with stage 4 breast brain cancer. It's called medulloblastoma. He had radiation, chemo, for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, close to it. Um, it was real tough. I think that for us in the beginning, um, we just we were told this information. I remember they called me on the phone and said, "Your son has a brain tumor. You need to go to the hospital." So I hung the phone up and thought, okay, I got to pack a bag, get my kid, call my husband. And Danny went through treatment. He was very, he's always had the greatest attitude. Like, I do remember when he would have radiation, he would be angry and he would say, like, I'm going to go T-Rex on somebody if they mess with me. And it's this 5-year old, 25-pound, frail little child. But he really did have such a great outlook and was super funny and really managed to make it through the process really well. When he was probably 5.5, 6 years old, I remember he wanted to be like, he wanted to have fun and just be friends with, all of his kids' friends. And I remember we started going to base camp. I met Terry in the hospital. And at the time, I had a 10-year-old daughter, and they did overnight camp. So it was very rare that I was out without my children. And I remember we took them to their first overnight camp, and I sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes, and my husband said, either we're going to go inside and get them or we're leaving. And I was like, okay, we'll leave. But I remember when we first walked in, there was a bunch of kids running around, and my 10-year-old came up to me and she said, Mommy, did you notice? And I said, what are you talking about, honey? She said, did you notice no one looked at Danny when we came in? And I realized that my 10-year-old felt all these feelings of dread in the way people looked at her brother, and she noticed this stuff. And so for me, I remember thinking, this is a place where she can come and just be Amanda and not have to worry about someone asking why her brother was bald or why someone doesn't have an arm. All these kids knew why they were there, and they were just able to support each other in a way that none of their other friends understood. So it was really important that she have this community of kids that could support her and not just sit around and ask questions. So I remember thinking, when Danny finishes treatment, I'm going to come volunteer. And so when Danny was almost done, he was just kind of on home oral chemo. I remember volunteering, and I volunteered full time for a year before Terry brought me on staff. And that was in 2005. So I have been there ever since.
It's amazing.
Danny got better. He went through high school, elementary, middle, high school. He had a normal life as a normal kid. And on Friday the 13th of 2020, Danny was having a headaches, and I told him I had a doctor's appointment, and his doctor was in the same building. And I told my husband, drop him off. I'll come pick him up when I'm done. And I told him, they probably won't be able to tell you why you're having headaches. And I said, if you still have a headache, I'll take you to the ER and they'll do an MRI, because really, honestly, that's the way you can get in. Otherwise, you got to wait 6 weeks to get an MRI.
I understand.
So I come out of my doctor and I see an ambulance go across the parking lot. And I was like, well, that's terrible. Someone's going to leave in this ambulance today. And then I found myself chasing after the ambulance. And I ran after through the parking lot, and they stopped by where his doctor's office outdoor building was. And they opened the door, and I said, is and they said, are you his mom? And I said, are you talking about Danny Whitaker? And here he comes on the stretcher.
Wow.
So he came out. They did not say he had a stroke, but when we got to the hospital, they asked me if he ever had a stroke before. And I kept thinking, why are they asking me that? No, he didn't have a stroke. He's had a headache. And, so I think my mind would not let that ingest. And
Yes.
I remember it took 2 days, and I was in the tub at 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. And I thought, oh my God, my 22-year-old kid had a stroke. And so that kind of started it all. And sadly, that was a blessing in disguise, because when we went to rehab, um, there was a lot of things going on. One of the things was they didn't want me to stay with him because he's 22 years old. And so I had to throw a fit, and they made me go home.
What? You're a mom. Of course you threw a fit.
So I went home the first night. And the first night I went home, they called me at 3 a.m. and said, we had to move your son down to cardiac. He started having chest pains.
Oh,
So, of course, the one night I go home begrudgingly, I go and come back, and they had done a scan on his chest. And that's when they found a mass on his kidney and a mass on his rib and spine.
had he had any other symptoms?
No, absolutely.
Nothing. So he had no idea it was the
No,
headaches were really it.
so the headache had only started a few days before. And that week, I remember, like, we went out every day. We went to the store, we went and did some other stuff. So it wasn't like he was feeling sick and couldn't do anything and laid in the bed. He was still up and functioning. He just said, I have a headache. And anytime he ever said to me throughout all of his years that he had a headache, my immediate thought was, where does it hurt? Because when the kids have a brain tumor, especially the brain tumor he had, he was getting headaches, and they would be up here because the pressure, and then they went away. So
Did you immediately go back when he told you about the headaches? Did you
yeah.
go back? Do you go back to that moment?
And that's why I said, I'll take you to the ER and we'll
Yeah.
get it right, because there's nothing they can do. There's nothing for a headache besides, here's some Tylenol, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning.
In the morning.
So when we went and they found the mass, I remember it was the heart doctor that came in, and he was so nonchalant. I think he thought we already knew that it literally knocked me off my feet. And I remember a nurse came out of nowhere with a box of tissues, because here I am hearing this information for the first time, and Danny too. And I think it's telling as the age that he is, because every time a doctor would come in, you could see the covers get a little higher and he would start getting hiccups. So it was like almost like a defense mechanism where he didn't want to hear it.
Sure.
I remember having to tell my husband, because this is the second time in my life, in his life, that I had to tell him our son had cancer. And it was just like so crazy. It took me right back to that moment. And, when he had the stroke, I remember asking the doctor, is he going to get back to normal life? And I remember that doctor looked me right in the eye and said, not for the foreseeable future.
Wow.
So Danny can't drive. He can't work. He can't do anything. And, here he is, this 22-year-old kid who's now turned 23. And it's just been really hard for him. Now he's got a fantastic attitude.
Well, that's where the title of our show comes from. It comes
Yes.
directly from Danny.
And he always says, I worry enough for both of us, which I'm happy to worry enough for the both of us. I don't want him to worry about anything. He has enough going on. And so he's had a partial kidney nephrectomy, where they were able to just take 30% of his kidney. So that way he's able to function, because without a partial kidney, he would have to probably go on dialysis. And we don't want that for him. He's young and viable. Once you start that process, it's, unless you get a kidney, transplant, you just don't come back from that. And then he is about to have surgery. So we just got the surgery date. Ironically, it's April 12th. is going to be,
What?
yep, his surgery date for
Wow.
the their mass on his ninth and 10th rib. And so we just did a guided MRI. um, they did a biopsy. So they used the MRI to see where they were biopsying, and they took 4 different samples. And it's actually a little bit bigger than they thought. So they'll go in and do a rod, and they'll do screws in the 7th through the 11th rib so that he will be able to walk once they take out that mass. And so, honestly, I'm not really sure how that's going to look after that. I know they've told me that for 3 months, his basic goals will be to stand and walk, to the bathroom and back. And then he'll be able to start physical therapy after 3 months. So we're just kind of, and the doctor was telling us, and I said to Danny, what did you hear when the doctor told us about your surgery? And he said, we're going to have surgery in like another, 6 weeks. And I'm like, okay. And, I'm going to leave it at that, because if he's not concerned about it, I'm not going to make him more concerned about it.
Well, like he said, you worry enough for both
Yeah.
of you.
And he's going to have to be the one that, goes through it. So I just have to take
He's
my,
got this resiliency, which
yes.
we talked about before we went live, and the attitude. I can't. I think attitude gets undervalued when you are facing
Absolutely.
anything. I have seen people when they get a diagnosis just collapse and really just give up. And it doesn't matter what age you are. If you think it's over, it begins to be over. And it's just Danny is to me when I saw the news, when I heard the news about Danny, you do that gasp, you do that. Oh my God! And of course, as a parent, I went straight to you and thinking what you and your husband and your family immediately as a parent, and then I went right to dad mode. Oh my God, Danny's got to go through this again,
Yeah.
and it's new. It's not to minimize, but it's not just cancer we're dealing with. He's got all of these other um, different things going on in addition to
Right.
cancer being.
He has a brain tumor, but it's non-malignant, so that's good.
Great.
And they've done some genetic testing to see, because when the doctor did the nephrectomy, he said he'd never seen that type of kidney cancer before. So they sent that away, and he will be in a study to follow to make sure we'll have regular scans. And I mean, and it's really crazy. I think as an adult in the um, in the oncology field, it's so different than when they're children. You know, to me, he's still a kid.
Of
And
course, he's always going to be your
and,
baby.
and so to be like in this where they're kind of asking him what to do, and he has no idea. He doesn't know, like any 22-year-old, they're not thinking about that kind of stuff. So they don't know like what date they had this surgery and what they did and what kind of, and so when they ask questions, and I feel like, to me, I needed to go somewhere. So we decided to opt into Mayo, because they have so many different specialists under one umbrella, that we're not going to different hospitals, and then this hospital can't see this hospital scan. So that was important to me, and I feel like they understood where I was coming from, and the fact that, like, I need to help him. I don't have to be the one in control. I want him to answer stuff because I need him to know about his own health. But at the same token, he doesn't know a lot of things. So let me, help. And like I said, I was just this morning, every now and again, things get in my head, and I'm just like, what's going to happen? I don't know how I'm going to handle this. But, like, throughout this, I am very fortunate that I get to help other families. So I see all these different processes and different stages. And, all you can ever do is just keep walking forward. Danny has volunteered for base camp for years, and that's part of the reason I didn't tell a lot of people in the beginning, because I didn't want our families who know him to put themselves in that same position. But you can't help but do that,
You
because
can't.
children are getting these treatments that are archaic, you know what I mean, and barbaric.
Right.
And but that's what it is. And,
So
so
what can we do to help Danny? We have a GoFundMe that we talked about earlier.
we have a go.
Obviously, we all know that health insurance only covers so much.
And
And then you have all of these other extra expenses and things. So you all have, somebody's established a GoFundMe, which is in the promo that you guys are looking at. And also I'll put it in the
so,
comments. Tell us about that.
so we do have the GoFundMe because this year, the deductible starts all over again. Every year you have this deductible, and my husband and I, just kept him on the same insurance. We really did try to apply for him for Social Security, but the last time I called, we sent it a few months ago maybe, and when I called last, it's still waiting to be assigned to a person to even review it.
Wow.
So, I just think to myself, what does a young adult do that is not able to work?
We were talking about that before we went
Yeah.
live. How scary that is.
And, fortunately, Danny can live with us. But what if, that wasn't the option? It makes me so worried. But like I said, Danny's medications are expensive. Everything is some type of cost. And I know for him, like, I think the only thing he's ever really said that made me think he's super worried is he's like, Mom, like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? And it's like, dude, you're okay. We got you. But I do understand where he's coming from, and so we do have the GoFundMe established. Anything that's donated will be towards Danny's care. I'm using it for medications, for travel, for whatever it is he might need. And, I appreciate it. We appreciate prayers. We appreciate good thoughts, positive vibes. I can, if anybody ever wants to contact me directly, I can send you our address if you want to send him a card or a well
Oh,
wish.
I love that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I love for Danny he loves to get mail, and the only thing he gets right now are bills.
Well,
And
I imagine I'm sure he wants to feel like he's going through all this and he doesn't want to feel forgotten. Not that I think the entire base camp family would ever let him feel that way, but it's still, you in your head, I've not been there, but I do know that must be a challenge. Even if you've got the most supportive group around you, it's still nice to get love,
oh yeah.
especially some unexpected love like
So
that.
people don't, and I've always said this, and it's, if you have never been through this, God bless you. You just
Amen.
Sometimes you just don't get it, because it's not like you have a cold or you're sick and I think the coronavirus has taught us that people are sick for months,
Yes.
and you think you're better and you're not. And with cancer treatment, it's kind of like that, because it is a long process. And like, obviously for Danny, the fact that he had a stroke, so there's three of the vessels that go into your brain. One of them was 60% blocked, one was 60% blocked, and one was 85% blocked. The reason he had the stroke is because that 85% blockage. So they had to go in and put a balloon in, because he was not getting blood flow, which is why he had the stroke. And so that is crazy that came directly from the radiation as a 5-year-old.
Yep.
All these years later, I remember the oncologist told us cisplatin, which is what he got when he was younger, causes kidney cancer later in life. And so, like, these treatments that he got as a child that saved his life are now rearing their ugly heads.
You're creating that risk, that initial risk for a future risk.
And I remember I told my husband, he's like, I was hoping we'd have another 10 or 20 years before he had cancer again. And I was like shocked, because I feel like, and I think it's funny when doctors tell you things, you really ingest what you can. What your brain
Absolutely.
comprehend is what you're ingesting. And what I ingested was that he was going to have a hard time in school. And what he heard was, he'll have cancer again later in life, but it'll be a long time from now. And I remember when the doctor said, what is it that you two want to do? And I said, well, if he's not here in 5 years, what difference does it make if he has learning disabilities?
Correct.
He opted in.
Correct.
And
Again,
so,
it's almost like Sophie's choice on
right. And, so, I mean, but like I said, through the years, we've been very blessed. Danny was really healthy for a long time. Happy. He's still happy.
He's still happy. He's the don't
we're
worry, be happy guy.
right.
All right, tell them tell them the best way. I know it's Cindy at basecamp.org.
Cindy
Tell them
dot
if
org.
is that the best? Will that work? You can go to
You
basecamp.org and
email me.
find Cindy.
You can find me on Facebook, Cindy Crespo Whitaker. And then I'm also on Instagram at Lucinda1970. Maybe I should change that so people don't know how old I am. But anyway,
No. That's the date your parents were born. Come on.
yes, but yeah, Cindy at basecamp.org is fine too. And like I said, for me, I think the joy in seeing Danny get a card or, anything, it makes him happy. He does feel like, wow, people do care about me. And I tell him,
Yes.
a lot of people love you. Everybody.
Yes. Even the people
That's
he
right.
doesn't know. All right. I love and appreciate you so much. Everything that you
Right.
do. We
Yeah.
love Danny. We're praying for Danny. We've posted about Danny on my prayer group on Facebook. We just, pray for Danny. But if you have a heart for helping out, the GoFundMe is right there on the page, and we'll put
Right.
it in the
Even
comments too.
we can get, like Terry Jones says, if we can get 100 people to give us $1, we got $100.
Oh my God! I literally thought that was Terry Jones saying it. I had a little PTSD flashback there. No, so we love you again. We are praying so
Right.
hard for Danny, and tell him we love him, please,
All
and
right.
we
Thank
love you
you. I
too.
will.
All right, Cindy.
All right.
We'll see you guys later. Get out and support Base Camp. Get out and support this GoFundMe if you have a heart for that. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. So
Okay.
you guys are always asking me how to get involved. This is a great way for you to get involved. So we'll see you guys soon. So much love for you guys. Bye.